Good afternoon, everyone. Authors at Google New York is very pleased to welcome Joshua David and Robert Hammond, who are neighbors of ours here in New York, and they are responsible for the Highline. I mean, how much more do I have to say? I don't know.
Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Josh, that's Robert. And we wrote a book that came out in October. What's my shirt's undone. And it's called Highline. I forget the subtitle now. It has a longer subtitle. But it's about the Highline, and it's on sale in the back. And Google has very generously arranged to have it be at a discount to all of you. So it's $10. It's a great buy. And we've been wanting to come and talk to you a little bit about it for a few months now, and the date kept moving around a little, so we're thrilled to be here. It's really an incredible journey that we've been on, and a lot of folks who work at Google have been on with us as well over the past 12 years or so, from when we started Friends of the Highline to where we are now, where we have nearly 4 million visitors a year coming to the Highline. And so it's sort of hard to imagine when you go up there now to imagine that once this was not open to the public, was threatened with demolition, was going to be torn down. It was a very different scenario just 12 years ago. And our book tells a little bit of that story. So you know this well, but this is the map of where the Highline runs along the west side of Manhattan. These were the conditions that led to the construction of the Highline. Trains started running down the west side in the 1860s. And immediately people were getting killed by the intersection of train traffic and other kinds of vehicles, horse-drawn carts and cars and pedestrians. And the avenues became known as Death Avenue because of these collisions. And because of that, the city of New York required that a man on horseback had to ride in front of each train. They were called the West Side Cowboys, and this is one of them. This is the Highline under construction. It started construction in 1929 and went to 1934. And you can see another elevated structure to the left in this image, which was the old Miller elevated highway. There used to be an elevated highway along the west side that was built around the same time. More construction shots. And this is the Highline when it was completed in 1934, and trains started running on it. And one of the interesting things about the way that it was built and the way that it was used was trains actually were supposed to go through buildings. They loaded and unloaded directly into warehouses and factories. And that was an efficiency system. And it's one of the things that makes the Highline such an interesting part of the built environment today. This is the way that I first saw the Highline from the ground, and Robert as well. I live in Chelsea. Robert lives in the Village. We didn't know each other. Became sort of interested in this odd relic that ran through our neighborhoods, but never really saw it from up above. Only saw it from the bottom, and thought, wow, that's an interesting structure, and maybe something interesting could be done with it. This is the landscape that grew up on top of it after the train stopped running. This was a photograph that was taken by a photographer named Joel Sternfeld in around 2000. But we didn't even see this when we started Friends of the Highline. We just saw it from the street and thought it was something amazing. We happened to meet at a community board meeting in 1999. We were both the only two people there who thought that something should happen to the Highline other than it being torn down. Everybody who was there was in favor of demolishing it. But we thought this runs for 22 blocks through 3 different neighborhoods. Here's an amazing opportunity to create a new way of seeing the city.
So, you know, Josh was a travel writer before this, and my background was in a little bit internet startups. And so people think, someone asked, could we see your business plan for how you were thinking about starting the Highline? And we really had no plan. We had no money, and we really had no relevant experience. People assume we're architects or designers. And in some ways, that's one of the keys to the success of the Highline, was not having a plan and not having any experience. Because we really, and it's great because now Josh and I get all this credit for doing this. But the most important thing we did was really just raise the flag and allowed other people to come along to help us, that did have the experience and that did have the money and that helped us sort of coalesce around a plan. We also had a lot of opposition. Now the Highline is generally pretty popular, but at the time, everyone really wanted to tear it down. The developers in the neighborhood wanted to tear it down. People in the community, some of them, it was a reminder that they lived in sort of a bad neighborhood in the past because the trains used to run through it. But this guy was our main opponent, Giuliani. But it turned out it actually started working in our favor, because if people weren't interested in the history or the pretty pictures, the wildflowers, we could say, well, Giuliani hates it and wants to share. And they'd be like, oh, well, then it must be a great idea. I would love to help you. The other thing that we really concentrated on early on was design. So one of the very first things we did was get a logo, and it's still on our business card, and it's now the logo of the park, and it was designed by a woman named Paula Scher from Pentagram. And the goal was, one, to make us look like, this is what one of our critics used to say, is this project's just two guys and a logo, which we thought is sort of a compliment, but it made us feel like we were more than just two guys working out of their apartments. And so, but it also was a commitment to design, that we weren't just, if we were successful, we weren't just going to throw up a stair and a planter and call it a day, that we were actually going to, good design was going to follow all the way through to, if we ever won it, actually to build something up there. So I'm going back to this Joel Sternfeld photo, because this was also one of the keys to the success, was these photos. So this photographer, Joel Sternfeld, went up there and he took pictures for us for 1 year between 2000 and 2001. And we published them in a book called Walking the Highline. And there's some of the books in our photos in our book. But you just see it at all different seasons. And this is really what people fell in love with. And especially this picture was the key to the success. We realized we could just talk less and show this photo more and often. And this is what helped people just sort of imagine their own dreams of what could be done with the Highline. This is, I don't know how many of y'all remember the restaurant Florent. They used to be on Gansevoort. This is Florent. It was like a French bistro. It was one of the first things in this neighborhood. It was open 24 hours. People would go after going to clubs. And every Bastille Day, Florent would dress up as Marie Antoinette. And this year he did with Marie Antoinette as the Highline, with the train going around the bustle and the hat. I know. It's sad now, but I think he's happier now that he doesn't have the restaurant. But the reason I put this slide up there is also, well, I'll go to the next slide. It's more exciting. We thought we'd, a semi-nude photo would, if you're, getting a little sleepy at lunch, could liven things up. Because one of the early keys to the success was just sort of the gay community, that Josh and I are both gay, and those were a lot of the people that lived in the neighborhood. Those were just our friends, and so they really coalesced around this project. And this is a talk we gave at the center a while ago about sort of the role, not just of the gay community that helped us, but the role that the gay community has played in preservation projects, not all over the city and the world.
Still going?
Yep. So Mayor Bloomberg came in office. He was much more supportive than Giuliani, but 9/11 had happened. We were, in an economic crisis. He didn't care about the pictures of Joel Sternfeld's wildflowers, and he didn't care about the naked guy on the Highline, really. He cared more that if it made economic sense. So we commissioned an economic feasibility study by a guy named John Alshore at a firm called HRNA to prove that it made economic sense. So we looked, the best example of a park really creating value is Central Park. We said, okay, Central Park's too big, too popular. Let's look at parks no one's ever heard of. But, some of y'all might, because it's around the neighborhood, like the Christopher Street Park, Duane Park. The buildings around those parks are more valuable to anywhere from 6 to 13%. We also met with real estate marketers, and they said the real way you create more value is you create a district, a place people want to work in, live in, visit, shop in. And so we started, we'd already started thinking about the Highline as a connector of different things. And this is a map that actually the woman that did our logo drew of the neighborhood, Paula Scher. And it just listed all the different things happening. It was helping us sort of show that this could connect it all together, because the West Village wasn't, it wasn't as popular at the time. And so the study showed, we got the study actually wrong. This is the findings. We thought it would cost $100 million to build. So far, it's cost about $150 million. And we said over a 20-year time period, the incremental tax benefits to the city would be about $250 million. The city has recently revised those numbers, and it's coming in more like $900 million. So it turns out to have been a good investment. The city was actually, we didn't really believe these numbers when we presented them. You know, we were sort of like fluffing them up. But the city believed enough of them to go forward and really got behind the project. And so, but even in 2003, with the city behind us, we still had no money. We had more of maybe a vague plan. And the property owners that owned property underneath were suing the city to tear it down. So, and no one knew what the Highline was. Like you asked people, you know, the thing, and you say, oh, the thing with pigeon shit, when you go under it, they go, oh, that thing, I hate that thing. But so what we did an ideas competition. And it was really just to create awareness of the project and have people think about it in different ways. And this was one of our favorites for many reasons. But it was a mile-long lap pool, which I still think would be an amazing idea. Some of the other concepts were more artistic, like sort of turning it into this icon. This was more of a political manifesto where you would imprison people in the I-beams of the Highline. And I don't know why they put a pool in there, too. But this, I think, was playing off of High, maybe, and Highline. And then this was actually looking at programming. What would happen in and around the Highline? And this is what's really come true so much. It's not just what happens on the Highline, but what happens in the neighborhood all around it. This was our other favorite, was the mile-long roller coaster. And this possibly could have been better than what we did, because you'd leave it all just as it was, and then this urban, seeing people's apartments and zoom down. And we had the exhibition at Grand Central, because the idea was to not make it just a local project, but to make it that this is important for the whole city. And we also, Josh and I didn't have a specific vision on what we thought should go up there, and that was one of the advantages of not being an architect, is we said, the city, the community should decide what was up there. So we started doing a whole bunch of open houses, and this is a postcard, asking people, what do you want? Where we asked them, what do you want to see up there? Even before we started really designing. We've now done about probably way over a dozen of these. We just had one about 2 weeks ago for the new section. You'll see some of the designs for that. And we're going to have more. We'll have another one this summer. If you're interested, just sign up for our email newsletter or Facebook. We're getting Google+. And we partnered. We've had to fight Giuliani, but then it was really about partnering, with government. And Bloomberg was very supportive. Christine Quinn, who's now the Speaker of the City Council, who lives in the neighborhood, Hillary Clinton, Chuck Schumer, Jerry Nadler, all really got behind the project, and it became a public-private partnership. And I love this photo because none of them are looking at each other. They can all stand together but not have to acknowledge each other. So when we got the political support, we still needed to get the property owners on board. So we actually looked again at Grand Central. And everyone knows that you might have heard the story of Jackie O, how she saved Grand Central from being demolished. But the other part of the story is one of the ways they saved it was they allowed the owners, the railroad, to transfer development rights anywhere in the neighborhood. It's also what saved the theaters and Times Square in the 90s. And so we used the same mechanism. It had only been used a few times in the city, but it allowed the property owners to transfer development rights anywhere in the neighborhood. Normally, you can only transfer to an adjacent property owner, and if they don't need your air rights or are already fully built out, you're out of luck. So this really created a market for these air rights, and it helped us get the property owners on board.
So then with that work done, we set about actually designing the park that would be on the Highline. And it was a very different process than the design ideas competition that Robert was showing you a little bit about before. Those design ideas, they could come from anyone. You didn't have to have any experience. You didn't have to be an architect. It didn't have to be financially rational. It didn't have to be technically viable. We were just looking for interesting ideas that would broaden the way that you thought about the Highline in the first round. Now now what we were doing was looking for actual teams of architects, multidisciplinary teams that could actually create a design that would make this amazing but challenging environment open to the public. And so I think this picture really tells the story of the challenge. We loved going up there when it was like this, and this was one of the many site visits we did to better understand the site before we entered into design. But what would happen is if you went up with a group like this, just a handful of people, by the end of the visit it was all trampled down. And this was an environment that we wanted to open to the public, but the fact of opening it to the public would destroy it. So the challenge that we gave to all of the design teams that wanted to compete was, how do you create a landscape that's reflective of this really amazing one, that embodies the power of nature to overtake a monumental man-made structure and really show the power of nature. And so we had 51 design teams initially submit applications. They were all made up of teams of architects, landscape architects, security consultants, lighting consultants, historic preservation consultants, signage people, and then we went down to 7 teams, and then we went down to 4 teams in the end that did the most detailed proposals. So I'll just show a few images from some of the different teams that submitted. This was a part of a proposal that was submitted by Zaha Hadid's team. This is the southern end of the Highline near Gansevoort Street, where the Whitney is now under construction. So one of the things that all of the teams picked up on was that something was going to be built at that site. So this was her proposal. It shows her environment was very swooping white forms, not a lot of landscape. She did have an amazing landscape architect on her team, Diana Balmori, but landscape really wasn't the focus of this proposal. And in one of the sessions where we were going over it at an intermediate stage with the various teams, Robert asked Zaha, why aren't there any trees in your proposal? And she's told Robert, trees are what architects do when they don't know what to do with the space. This is part of a proposal by Michael van Valkenburg, who was working with Julie Bargman on a team called Terragram. It was a great proposal in many ways. Some of the things that are in it are things that are reflective of choices that we ultimately decided to do. This is a stair that's not so different from stairs that Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro and James Corner ultimately designed. This is a structure. This is Stephen Hall's team. Stephen Hall had a really interesting history with the Highline. Long before Robert and I came along, Stephen was working with another preservationist who was trying to save the Highline back in the mid-90s, a guy named Peter Oblitz. And they worked together for a little while and then went their separate ways. But Stephen was one of the original Highline advocates and did an earlier phase of work called Bridge of Houses, which became very famous. So we were thrilled to have him competing in the end. This is another image of his proposal. But the team we ultimately selected was James Corner Field Operations, working with Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, and the Dutch horticulturist Piet Oudolf. And this is a rendering from their competition entry. And it's really interesting how much it is like what we actually built. It's fairly rare in a competition phase for architects to put forth something that doesn't get really drastically modified as the process goes along, and to have the renderings in the competition phase actually be so close to what we actually built is quite unusual. You can see they were picked for this system that they created, which they called planking, the walkway system that allowed the grasses and plants to push up through the concrete walkways, very much the way that the plants used to push up through the gravel ballast of the Highline. And this is also from their competition board, and it showed how this system could be, was a modular system, could be tailored to different needs in different spaces. So in areas where you imagined you might have a lot of people gathering, you could have more hardscape, the planking system really going from one side of the Highline to another, very much like it is within the Chelsea Market Passage. And then different ways of varying the percentage of hardscape to plantings to the point where on the far right you have a condition where it's planted all the way from one side of the Highline to another, which is what they call the flyover condition. It was something that we thought was just a concept that we would never do, so it was really exciting when we actually ended up doing it in section 2. So this is the Highline under construction. We did have to ultimately remove all of the existing landscape that was up there to go down to the bare structure, re-waterproof it, redo the drainage system. Actually, the single most expensive part of the project was repainting the structure. It had been originally painted in lead paint, so it had to be put in containment units and all sandblasted, primed, and repainted. It was the single biggest part of the job. And here you can see the rail tracks being reinstalled. Before that rehabilitation of the structure, we removed all the tracks, but they were all surveyed. So whenever we put tracks back into the park, they're the original tracks going back in their original locations. So I'm going to take you I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with the landscape of the Highline, so I'll just take you on a very quick tour of it. This is down that walk. Oh, I'm not quite on the tour yet. This is that walkway system actually completed and viewed from above, and the plantings. Pete Udolph was the horticulturist that we chose. He was on their team, and he was selected really because his palette of work really reflected what was originally up on the Highline. He was known for using very naturalistic massings of grasses and perennials that really evoked a natural-looking landscape, which you can see in this picture here. But he added in a lot of new plant species into the mix so that you'd have vivid displays all through the seasons. We have things flowering up there basically from February through November. There's something that's flowering up on the Highline. This is a section in the Chelsea Grasslands. This is things that are flowering up there right now, the red buds. And one of the things that Pete Udolph specified was that in the winter, a lot of times in perennial gardens, all of the dead plant material gets cut down before winter. He specified that it all be left in place, partly for the health of the plants. It protects them from freezing and thawing, but also because of the beautiful forms of this dead material all by themselves or when there's snow or ice on them. We also had an incredible lighting consultant, Herve de Scott from l'Observatoire. And one of the things they discovered in doing their night visits to the Highline before designing the lighting system was that because it was so dark up there, your pupils didn't contract. When you're on the streets in New York, you're constantly passing beneath these very bright cones of light from the street lamps, and it makes your pupils contract, and it makes it harder to see the night sky and the buildings that are around you. And they noticed when they were up there at night, they didn't have that condition, and they could really see the night sky and the buildings better. So one of the things that they aimed for in designing the lighting was to always keep it waist level or below, so it was never shining in your eyes, but down on the walkway and the plantings. And these are the fixtures that they designed to go into the railings and shine down onto the plant material. And that's the lighting system as it works today. And it's one of the things that makes evenings on the Highline such a special and magical experience, really. So just a quick run from south to north on the Highline, Gansevoort Plaza, where the Highline was chopped off in 1990, and it was really jagged edge, which the design team proposed, just sort of polishing up to use as sort of a reveal, like a section of how the Highline's built, and that's it completed. And then up the Gansevoort stairs. They designed their stairs, they called them slow stairs, and they were designed to extend the experience of going from street level to the Highline level. So you had steps that were very, very gently graded with long landings, and a period in the middle where you were actually passing through the center of the structure and able to reach out and touch the beams on the side and the rivets that were all hammered by hand before emerging in the planted environment up above. This is another set of those stairs coming through at 14th Street. This is the Diller von Furstenberg sun deck between 14th and 15th Street, looking out to the river. One of the things that we did as we were thinking about the spaces on the Highline was thinking of it not only as a track to get from one place to another. It was a linear transportation system, and I think people really thought about it a lot as a way of moving from one space to another. But we really wanted it to be a series of social gathering spaces as well, where people stopped and inhabited the spaces and stayed for a while. And so that's why we designed these large chair structures at the Diller von Furstenberg sun deck. deck, which have become really popular social gathering spots. Also why we brought in the water feature in that location. We're just about to turn it on in about a week or so. And it's one of the things that really draws people to the spot, kids in particular, taking off their shoes and playing in it. This is the Chelsea Market Passage. One of the amazing things, as in that historic photo of the train going through the building, this is a place where trains passed through and brought loaded goods in and out of what was the old Nabisco factory. And it's really one of the things that makes the Highline such an unusual urban condition. You have public space, New York City, public parkland, which goes through these donut holes in private buildings. And it's really the only instance that you'll see of the public occupying this zone within private space. The same space at night. A wonderful little sort of side walkway just north of the Chelsea Market Passage. And this was always one of Robert's and my favorite features in Section 1, the 10th Avenue Square. And its design evolved out of a challenge. This is over 10th Avenue. And one of the things that we were gonna have to do in this location was put up a high fence on that northern run to protect against people throwing things over onto the avenue below. And so we looked at a number of different design solutions of how you could get away with not having it. And this was one of a whole bunch of proposals of how you could actually use the structure itself as its own 8-foot high fence. And then it took on a life completely of its own as a design feature, an amphitheater built in within this space. And here you can see the incredible amount. That was the biggest engineering feat of the whole project, was removing a large number of massive steel girders that made that square technically possible, taking them all out, re-engineering the whole area so it could become a little amphitheater in there. There you see it completed, and it's really one of the landmark design features of the Highline. You can descend into the structure, watch the traffic flowing beneath you, and people stay there for a long time and just watch the flow of traffic and the life of the city streets below. It's really a magical place. This is the Chelsea Grasslands moving north at the beginning of a 13-block straightaway that runs through West Chelsea, followed by the Chelsea Thicket, a more enclosed environment. What the design team was really looking to do in this area, because it is a straight run that goes for 13 blocks, was thinking about different ways to create a kind of room about every two blocks. So the landscape is cohesive. It's the same walkway system that's taking you through it, but the landscape is changing in subtle ways, so it's evolving into very different changing environments about every 2 blocks. This is the lawn at 23rd Street. Very popular gathering spot. And benches that were designed to integrate an old rail platform that used to service this warehouse building. Those bays with the glass block and it used to be loading bays for trains accepting goods on and off the Highline. This is the Falcone flyover between 25th Street and 27th Street. That flyover condition that had been shown in the competition entry that we thought was really just a concept actually ended up getting built, and it's one of the great features of Section 2. It runs between these 2 warehouses that when the Highline when we first started going up there, its original landscape, a forest was growing in between those 2 warehouses because it was shadier there and there was better moisture retention. So the plantings that are in the flyover area are ultimately going to recreate that forest condition. They're going to come up and sort of envelop the flyover, and it'll be as if you're walking through the canopy of the trees. That's the flyover viewed from above. Again, the flyover viewed from above with the 26th Street viewing spur. Another instance of using a feature on the Highline as a way to direct your attention not to the Highline itself, but to the city around you, very much like the 10th Avenue Square. And it's one of the other things that's, I think, really special about the Highline as a park. Only a small part of the experience is the zone of the park itself. A much bigger experience is the way that you're looking at the city around you. And so thinking about new ways of directing a visitor's gaze and framing that gaze are a very important part of what the design team does. And it goes both ways. Also at the 10th Avenue Square, the view from the street up to those zones is as interesting and compelling as it is when you're up there looking down. This is a zone coming down off of the flyover at 27th and 28th Street. That same zone, it's called Wildflower Field, a simple straight pathway that's planted to be reminiscent of the original Highline landscape that you saw in those Joel Sternfeld photos earlier on. The same section at night. And then we end at in section 2 at a feature called the 30th Street Cut Out. It's the cement decking that actually held up the ballast and the tracks has been removed. It's been cut out, and this viewing platform is lifted up slightly, so you get these great views out to the Hudson River. And it's one of the things that the design team did a lot was to, instead of really concentrating on adding major new features, they looked at ways you could do subtractions the same way as at the 10th Avenue Square, remove something to give you a different experience within the Highline. So here the decking has been removed so that you can see the girders below. And this is an elevated shot of the way that the Highline moves through West Chelsea in the Village, and I think this is what makes it such a special condition, that you're snaking through the center of these blocks, looking at the city from a perspective that you otherwise never get to see the city from, and you can see it bringing us here up to the West Side rail yards.
So, one of the reasons it's created so much value is it's been a boom, to development in the neighborhood. This is a map of over 40 different projects that have already happened or in the process of happening. One of the most exciting is that the Whitney is moving downtown to the base of the Highline. It's already under construction. This is a design by Renzo Piano. It'll be about 4 or 5 times as big as their current space, which they're going to be renting to the Met Museum. And they'll be opening this in 2015. And the shorter little building right there that's black is going to be our headquarters, and we're going to open that in about hopefully next year. And the roof will be the largest outdoor sculpture garden for the Whitney. We talked about the $900 million in added tax revenues. This is just some of the things that's already happened in and around. The Highline is $2 billion in new construction projects. Again, in probably the worst economic times in a while. 12,000 jobs. The other great thing is it's also not just regular development. A lot of it has been really interesting. And there's a spot where you can stand here at 18th Street and see a building by Frank Gehry, Jean Nouvel, Shigeru Ban, Annabelle Seldorf, Neil Denari. So in addition to running through 3 historic, is it 3? 4 historic districts, you can also see some of the best new architecture in the city. So when Josh and I met, one of the first things we did was start Friends of the Highline, and that's what is running the park now. And it's really this public-private partnership, and it was modeled after the Central Park Conservancy. So we're a private group. We don't work for the city that manages and operates the park for the city. We pay for 100% of all the cost of maintaining it. The city pays for security and liability. But the gardener, that's one of our gardeners, Johnny, all the gardeners, the maintenance workers, the people taking out the trash are all our employees, and they're paid for by members. If anybody wants to become a member, we love members. Its membership starts at $70. And they're working through all different seasons. That was not this year. It is really hard to remove snow because we can't use salt. We have to do it all by hand and machine because the water is recycled into the planting bed. So if you use salt, it'll go into the plants. So we originally thought we'd have about 300,000 visitors a year. That's about how many the Whitney gets in a year. So we thought that would be a good comparable. Last year we had 3.7 million visitors. Our busiest day was Father's Day. It'll be interesting now. I sort of want to see a competition between Mother's Day and Father's Day. Mm-hmm. We had an open section too, so maybe that's why the dads went out last year. But just to see where the Highline lies with other, institutions. We have about almost 1 million more than MoMA. And this is crazy. Travel and Leisure did this poll of the 20 top world destinations, and I think it's a little ridiculous. We're ahead of the Acropolis, but one of the things that is sort of a fear of ours is that it becomes just for tourists, and we're glad tourists visit and that it's very popular, but we really want it mainly to be for New Yorkers. So we do over 300 free programs throughout the year, and almost all of them are geared towards locals. A lot of them are kids-oriented. This is a step festival we started last year where kids compete from all 5 boroughs. We're going to be doing it again in June. We do a lot of kids programming. This is in that 10th Avenue Square where we used as an amphitheater. Throughout the summer, every Wednesdays and Saturdays, we have something called children's play where they can build these sort of their own sort of Highline-esque structures. We do a lot of musical performances. We have salsa. We're going to have salsa dancing every Thursday night, once a month throughout the summer. And we have stargazing every Thursday night from now until the fall. You can just go up there, and there's astronomers up there that will bring up their telescopes for you to look at. And I didn't even know you could see any stars in New York, but you can actually see the rings of Saturn. And this is sort of an unfortunate slide because one of the most famous things about the Highline is watching people have sex in the standard windows. It's more of an urban myth than a reality, but that's not what when you see the people with telescopes, that's not what they're there for. But yeah, this is one picture of that. One of the other things we do to keep, for locals, and a reason to keep coming back is public art on the Highline. This is a work by Spencer Finch, and almost all of it is temporary, so it changes. So if you go up there right now, 21st Street, this is a work by Sarah Z. It's actually going away in June, so it's always changing. At any one time, there's about 5 or 6 different projects up there. This is where the developer has given us this billboard. This is that Joel Sternfeld photo. These are all different artworks. This was a John Baldessari piece we put up in the spirit of Christmas in December, which was a $100,000 bill, which was an actual legal tender that banks used between themselves to transfer money. And he blew it up the size of a billboard. So the Highline's also not done. We have some great art and we have some great performances coming up on Earth Day. There's a woman named Allison Spear, who is doing this thing called Make a Salad, where she had this work in the 60s where she'd throw lettuce off a building onto a tarp and then throw tomatoes and salad dressing, and then everyone does the tarp up and down, and then she serves the salad. We're going to do it off the Highline on Earth Day.
Yeah, you should come. It's a free salad for 1,000 people.
So we're not done. There's the last section of the Highline, which is this part right here, and it runs around the rail yards. This is the largest undeveloped site in Manhattan. Here's where the Olympic Stadium was originally going to go here when New York was competing against London, which won, and it was going to be the Jet Stadium as well. It's the most beautiful part of the Highline. Most of Joel's photographs were taken there. You get great Hudson River views. That's the Jet Stadium that was defeated by the community. But now it's going to be developed for mixed use of retail, commercial, and residential by the related companies. So it's going to be 12 million square feet. So that's like downtown Seattle times 2, all squeezed into these 2 sites, with the Highline running all the way around it. And at first, they actually wanted to people wanted to tear down the Highline because they thought it would be easier to develop if it was just an open site. But we've won that battle, and the city's been really supportive, and everyone's agreed to keep all of the Highline. And our goal right now is to try to fully build out this portion of the Highline in blue, and then this green part to do a temporary walkway that could last for 5 or 10 years that would get us all the way to 34th Street by 2014. And that's, it would be all the way to where the Javits Center is. And there's going to be a new number 7 subway, the first new subway in Manhattan, I think in 75 years, is going to open up around then, too. I'm going to skip. I think we have I wanted to show some of the slides of, oh, no, we don't have them in here. I don't know. Can you go back? Oh, sorry. But what I wanted to show, and I guess we didn't include them in here, is some of the new slides for Section 3. So we've just released the designs of the final section. You can find them on our website that are all there, and that's where we're still working on those, and that's why we've so far had 2 community input sessions on those designs. So people still have a chance to sort of shape, at the end, what's happening there. And also want to end on this. This is my favorite programming that we didn't even plan. So when we opened Section 1 in 2009, we misdirected one of the lights that was supposed to shine on the stairs, and it shone in this woman's bedroom. And she called to complain, and we didn't do anything, and because we were busy. But she, like a good New Yorker, made the best of the situation. And she had a friend who was a cabaret singer, would go out on her fire escape and serenade the Highline, people on the Highline. And she named it the Renegade Cabaret. And it lasted for several months until her landlord told her she couldn't go out on her fire escape anymore unless there was a fire. So, but to me, what I like, it's just a symbol of how New Yorkers can respond to different things. And the Highline itself was an accident. It was meant to be a loaded freight line that fell into disuse, mostly in the 90s. And the last train was in the 1980. So, it was sort of an accidental park. And so the kind of programming that comes around accidentally is, to me, what's, I think, most interesting about the Highline. So I think we have a few minutes to answer questions. I guess I have a question for y'all. Last time I came and spoke, everyone was on their laptop working. Is that a new culture that y'all don't? I mean, it's nice that y'all are actually looking at us, but I can't imagine that we've gotten much better at speaking, but.
You spoke about how one of those things that's going up near the undeveloped space is going to last for just 10 years. Why is that? Why not longer?
Yeah. So we'll keep a walk. We want to we don't have enough money, basically, to build the whole Highline out. It would cost about $100 million to build the full walkway. And so we only have about half that. So we're going to build half of it fully and then put a temporary walkway. Some people said, well, why can't you just keep the temporary walkway permanently? Because that's sort of an interesting condition. But ultimately, we have to go through and remediate the space. So we have to go in and do the lead paint remediation Josh talked about, and we have to go in and remove put in new waterproofing. So it'll last 5 to 10 years, and then we would build out it to a permanent level. So the idea is the walkway would be finished after that.
So I think I might have been there that Father's Day. It was really crowded.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's of course going to get more crowded. So what's the plan to somehow deal with that? I mean, it's great that there's a lot of people, but as it gets more crowded, you can enjoy less of it, right?
I think it is one of the real challenges that we're looking at right now, and looking at different ways that we can address it. One of the things that the easiest way to deal with it is people who are in the neighborhood or are here every day is to think about the majority of times it's not crowded. There are many beautiful times of day to go, early in the morning, late in the evening, during the weekday, during the week almost all the time is manageable. There are two very crowded times, which are Saturday from 11:30 to about 5:30 and Sunday from 11:30 to about 5:30. So those are times that as people who live and or work in the neighborhood, you have the opportunity to take advantage of times when it's not so crowded. And we are looking at those more crowded times. We're just about to start a new strategic planning process, and one of their group of central questions that we're asking ourselves as an organization, and that's one of them. How do you handle that issue? Because it's not the experience that we created the Highline to have. It's great to be popular. It's great to be loved, but that's really challenging. We did experiment when we opened Section 1 and a little bit when we opened Section 2, when we know there are going to be very intense crowds based on something dramatic happening like the opening. We actually did have to regulate the number of people who came in, and so at those times, entrance points got closed and you could only enter at one point, and there was a line. And that is a way that you can regulate it. It's very labor intensive, very expensive, and people don't like it. So you have a whole bunch of negatives associated with that system. So I don't think that's not the answer, but we are looking for other answers.
One of the dilemmas is also, when we're thinking about Section 3, one of the answers is you can make the path wider, so there's more room. But the problem is that takes away from the planting. I mean, and with Section 2, we actually have, the path is narrower. So you have more planting to path. So it feels more crowded, But for most people we hear, they like it more because there's more planting. So there's the dilemma. It's sort of like highways. Do you add another highway, but then do you just get more people? So it's one of the things we're trying to find that right balance.
How did you or how do you plan for very large plants that want to get even larger, like a tree that wants to grow 60 feet whose roots can only go down so far?
Most of the trees have been selected to be moderate in size and to have root systems that deal with the very confined nature of the Highline. One of the things when we planted it and opened it, we really didn't know how these plants were going to do. It's a very forbidding condition. There's only about that much soil there. It's about 14 inches of soil, and so for trees, that's an extra challenging situation. Where there are a lot of trees, we've done some subtle additions to the way the planting beds are designed to allow for more soil depth. You see this down at the very southern end of the Highline, what we call the Gansevoort woodlands, where there's a very sort of dense grouping of trees. We've added a Corten steel barrier edge to the planting bed, which gives us another 2 feet or so of soil so that we can have all of those trees there. Those are also, now the whole Highline has an irrigation system, but in the beginning it was designed just to have irrigation where the trees were, so they were given special watering systems as well. And I think, over time, eventually the root systems will get too big on some of the trees and they'll have to be replaced, as happens in a lot of parks that have trees growing in planters or confined areas.
I mean, one of the things, the planting depth the average planting depth is about 13 inches. So that's one of the amazing things that's actually worked and you're basically on a bridge. So, it heats from below and above. And it's amazing that we were worried, would all these plants even survive? But a lot of them were selected. About, I think, a quarter of them were actually plants that were already growing up there. So, we knew that they could thrive in that kind of environment.
And the what was up there to begin with before we started it was gravel. There was not even any dirt in it. So it has always shown the remarkable resiliency of nature to grow in very inhospitable conditions. And I think it's continuing to do that now.
Sorry. I screwed up the screen again.
Yeah, I'm just curious, with so many stakeholders with vested interests in the various stages of your proposal, whether it was the design competition or whether it was probably like the transfer of property rights, I'm just wondering who had ultimate decision-making authority? It was the two of you. I'm wondering how you were able to achieve that, given you guys weren't subject matter experts in design, you're not architects, you're not urban planners. So is it just that you were the first two were the most enthusiastic, and so it gave you that right?
Ultimately, it's a city project. So when we were designing and building, it's ultimately the decisions all go up to the city. That said, it's been a remarkable partnership between us and the Bloomberg administration. I think what was interesting was at the very beginning, when the Bloomberg administration decided it wanted to do the Highline, they were buying into an idea that they didn't know very much about and we knew a lot about. So they welcomed us into a partnership that was very productive because we had, at that point, we'd assembled some expertise on it. And the design team selection process was, I think, a really unusual and interesting example of the city and a nonprofit working collaboratively together around a table with basically the same number of people on each side. We always acknowledged that ultimately the city had the call on anything that was going to happen up there, but they gave us a very wide degree of discretion in directing how the design was going to go. And so I think it's been a really amazing partnership. There is also one element of the project that goes up to the federal government level. We're what's called a rail-banked park or a rail-banked trail. There are different ways that railroads can be reused as trails or parkland. And rail banking is one sector of that. It's essentially a program that was created by the government to allow rail corridors that go over private property to be maintained and used for other uses without losing without the easement going poof into the air. So that all had to go through a federal approval process.
I mean, the other thing is money. We were raising private money, so that's also what gave us a place at the table on important design decisions, and still gives us the role, to be able to run it, is because we're, raising private money to help supplement what would other have to be paid for by the public.
I noticed a change with the lighting in the Chelsea Market pass-through. I think initially it was blue at night, and then I had like two sets of fluorescent tubes, one blue and one white for I think day. And it looked like it started running both of those tubes at night to make it more or brighter and also purple. Is that true, or can you tell us the story of why that changed?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of back history of the lighting in Chelsea Market. One, we insisted on having a dimmer, which the Parks Department was like, why does a park need a dimmer? I'm saying it was very important. But that was to try to create, if you just do the white light, it can be very harsh. And so if you do the white and blue light, it creates a warmer light when you're in there. It's more flattering as well. But the artist during the day doesn't like how, there's the art piece, on the wall, doesn't like how it looks with the blue light. So we try to use the light as little as possible, and the blue light mainly just on certain occasions. On the 14th Street passage, we use both. But it's really intended, you can do blue or white, but it's really intended to have them both on at the same time in the evening.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things, was just the blue light only at night. Even in the day, I mean, you can do different things, but I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, the lighting is done by a guy named Herve from the Observatoire, who came up with all.
I think we have time for one more question.
So congrats, it's an amazing achievement. The meatpacking district is unrecognizable today, right? And so some of it was or not dependent on your contribution, but you've actually accelerated the development of this neighborhood. Did you do anything to try to protect some of the historical establishments and businesses in the area? Because, for example, you can see the Whitney sitting on top of all the meatpacking district locations, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Highline gets too much credit and too much blame in some ways. I mean, the meatpacking was changing gangbusters way before we opened in 2009. Florent had left before we opened. I mean, I think the die was already set for this. But one of the great things that actually Florent accomplished around the same time we were getting started was making this a historic district. So, what that means is, one, you can't, change a lot of the height, the character, like the steel awnings. The other thing that the neighborhood fought and won for was not having residential. And that's partly why it's such an entertainment zone for bars and clubs and restaurants. But it's also helped keep sort of the character of the buildings and not having them be all residential. In certain ways, we don't have a lot of control. We have control of what happens to the Highline, but on what happens outside of it is a little bit, out of our control. We can help certain people and work. The good news about the meat market, the building, as part of the Whitney going in, the city signed a long-term lease with the remaining meat market vendors that are still there. So they'll be there for at least another 20 years.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you.